All right, so the choice of entity, don't worry about this, okay? I'm just telling you this so you know, and when you hear this, it'll make some sense to you. But when you get to that stage and you talk to somebody, they'll be able to explain this to you. But this is just sort of, again, a view, not even from 20,000 feet, like from 50,000 feet. But the enterprise should be incorporated. And the reason for that is to protect you from liability. That is, if somebody comes into your office and slips and hits their head, they can't get to your personal assets if you're incorporated. There are other reasons for that. I'll talk a little bit about PLLCs and professional corporations, but you should all be incorporated. You should be in either a LLC or a corporation. It's cheap, it's easy, and it does prevent your personal assets from being exposed if something, heaven forbid, goes wrong. And even if it doesn't go wrong, lawyers will sue you. I mean, I don't mean to make it sound, to be flippant about that, but it is a litigious society, as you know, right? And it's lawyers should take some of the blame, but then there's that's just the way the rules are right now. C corporation is when you think of a corporation that you drive down the street, you see a sign, IBM, the Fortune 500 companies are C corporations. They are tax-paying entities. They pay taxes. You've seen a lot in the news about lowering the tax on these C corporations. Again, that's a different topic, but they do pay taxes. When you have a small C corporation, you would pay out all your money as wages to everybody, to your workers, to yourselves, so that you're not paying any tax at the C corporate level, so you zero out the earnings. So it doesn't mean that you'll, for every year, be paying double taxes, but there is a risk for double taxation if you don't do it right. S corporation is typically smaller businesses, under 100 shareholders. An S corp does not pay tax. It files a tax return, but it doesn't pay tax. The tax attributes flow through to the owners, okay? So you don't have to worry about flushing it all out, but you'll pay tax. Now, what's interesting in the news, if you watch it, one of the proposals for tax reform is to make a portion of the owner's take-home pay in the S corp taxed at the corporate rate, which would lower rates, the highest rate, from 38%, 39% to 15%. So we'll see how that goes. LLC is a limited liability company. If you're a single member LLC, you don't even need to file a tax return for the LLC. That's taxed like a partnership. It's just flows through to the owners. Partnerships, we don't see a lot of those anymore. Used to be in vogue, and about when I started practicing, maybe a year or two after that, in the early 90s, North Carolina adopted the Limited Liability Company Act, which gave birth to LLCs. And now, if anybody wants to do a partnership, they do an LLC because it gives you more flexibility than a partnership would. It's just easier. So that's your first question, is type of entity. And again, that's something you probably wouldn't try at home unless you're just going to be a single member. If you want to join, if you're doing a new entity as part of a merger or an acquisition, you would have somebody help you with that. A professional entity is your state law question. That is, are you required to be a professional entity? So I mentioned my wife's in medicine. She has to deliver care through a PA, PC, or PLLC, or by herself. And when you see that P in front, that is supposed to tell the public that that person is personally liable for their professional negligence. Okay? So that means that using a doctor who has an office, if the doctor operates on the wrong leg, he cannot say, corporation, you sue the corporation, not me. That's professional negligence. He operated on the wrong leg. Now, if somebody comes in his office, slips, and falls, that's not professional negligence, that's just negligence. They can only sue the corporation, okay? I've listed certain professionals need to deliver care through a professional entity. There's exemptions for nonprofits. Some of the professional boards say that you cannot have any membership, any ownership held by anyone who is not a licensee, like for MDs. If my wife's an MD, I can't, even though it might make sense from an estate planning standpoint, I'm not an MD. I cannot own an interest in that practice. There are a few exceptions to that. Psychiatrists and psychologists can own in the same professional association. But again, you don't need to commit that to memory. Usually when we have somebody that comes to us and says, we'd like to create a business, we usually go to the cookbook and say, okay, this is what the statute says you have to do. We had midwives come to us within the last few months, and midwives aren't listed up there. They don't need a professional corporation, although there's some debate about that in our state. Tax considerations I talked about. C Corp, there is a potential for double taxation. S Corp, the income flows through. LLCs and partnerships are also flow through. So here's part of what I'd ask when you come. I probably, if you came into our office and said I wanted to do this, I wouldn't really spend much time on the entity question. I'd say, who's going to own and how much, right? So here's a typical conundrum. You have two practices merging. You might have 7 owners in one practice, and you might have 3 owners in the other. Okay? So what's the ownership going to be like? Is it going to be everybody's going to own 10 shares? Everybody's going to be a 1/10 owner? Or are you going to let the practice with 7 and the practice with 3 each own 50? Right? So you're saying it's a merger of equals, but immediately after the merger, the practice with 7 will own 70% of the deal, right? We've done mergers before with medical practices that actually delineated that. One had 11 doctors at the time, one had 7 or 8, and they wanted it to be 50-50, not share and share alike. So 50-50 means the 11 doctors owned a little bit less per person than the 7 doctors.